Imagine, if you will, a South Africa that treats animals with respect, empathy, and understanding. Maybe we can just start with treating each other with those things, because I don't think we've even got that right as human beings yet. But looking around this room tonight, laying tonight's agenda against where we were a year ago, it is like we're living a different reality. So thank you for being a part of this journey, and thank you for being here and for sitting in the front row. Very brave. My name is Graham Richards. I'm a part of this broader PAWS family, but I've been very privileged to have a front row seat to watch this incredible narrative unfold. So please give yourselves a massive round of applause just for being here. And I say that because you are also a live studio audience tonight. We are broadcasting live, and it's so nice to be connecting with people online on YouTube right now. And I'm going to ask you guys at home to please start thinking critically. Weigh in on the conversation. If you've got questions, we will get into a Q&A a little bit later. My role tonight, when I look at the gravitas, the quality of the panel tonight. I'm sharing a stage, not with, normally in these spaces it would be 9 of us bleeding hearts trying to land the emotional story with one scientist trying to back us up. Tonight we are bringing lawmakers, preeminent scientists, economists into this space to paint a very different picture. My job, my role outside of these spaces in TV land and on stages only manifests when the emotional and the commercial stories are landing together. If that wasn't happening right now, my skills wouldn't be needed. It is, without a doubt, the most powerful position of passion and purpose I've ever been able to occupy, and I'm playing a tiny role in this space. So I want to, and this is the last time I'm going to be on my soapbox tonight, I want to frame tonight like this. Yes, we're going to look back. We're going to look at the MTT, the Ministerial Task Force. There are going to be a few acronyms and names that you might not know. Google them, research them, especially the people talking on this stage. Yes, give them their flowers. It's them holding the line that has earned us the right to have this networking opportunity. Give them their due. This wouldn't have happened otherwise. I love the fact that we have an opportunity to look at that baseline of animal welfare shifting, the laws changing in the most powerful, fundamental way, not just for the lions, but for all animals, whether that's companion or farming or otherwise. That's wonderful. But right now, think of this as one thing only. These aren't those leading the charge, asking you to follow. This is the framework of change. These are the people, the structures, the organizations that have come together to change the laws through democratic process, that have got the science to back up what we need to do, and that have built the relationship with the key role players to actually get it moving. Think as a social entrepreneur. Think about the data you have. Maybe your science can help their money. Maybe their money can help your science. Maybe your network in the intersection of things is what's going to spark the next phase. We can look forward with a lot of hope now, and we can act. So please, think with that hat on tonight. And yes, my other role will be to dumb things down just a little bit, because we have got an unbelievable panel ready to answer those critical questions and do a deep dive. So I'm not going to steal any more of their time. What I am going to do is say to my girls, Kajal, Karishma, thank you so much for being here. They are going to be walking around with microphones a little bit later to take your questions for our panel. So please think critically along those lines. We are streaming, we are taking photos. If any of you are uncomfortable with that, please raise it with the PAWS team. This will be recorded, it will be broadcast, and we are going out live right now. So a little bit later, we'll delve into the Q&A session, but I think being the State of Animal Welfare address, we need that address. And again, I reinforce how far we have come since 2025 to set the scene, set the tone for this incredible year and our networking opportunity. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for the Director of PAWS South Africa, Fiona Miles.
Thank you very much, Graham. Good evening, distinguished guests, colleagues, partners, and friends. It's a true honor to welcome you to the 2026 State of Animal Welfare Address. Today, we gather to ask ourselves, what kind of South Africa do we want to be? A South Africa that turns a blind eye to suffering, or one that leads with compassion, justice, and dignity for all living beings. Standing here tonight, and I think as Graham said, I'm struck by a sense of familiarity. We've been here before, we've had these conversations, and have raised these concerns. It feels important to acknowledge that this is not our first conversation, because progress is not made in moments. It's made through continuity, courage, and collective efforts. At our first State of Animal Welfare address, we took a broad lens. We asked the fundamental questions. What does animal welfare look like across farm, wild, and companion animals? Where are the cracks in the system, and why, despite proclaiming that we are a country that holds our natural heritage in high regard, and despite decades of advocacy, do so many animals remain unprotected? Last year, we narrowed the focus through the One Health lens, recognizing that animal welfare is inseparable from human health, environmental sustainability, and economic resilience and social well-being. That conversation made one truth unmistakably clear. When animals suffer, we suffer. Tonight, we take the next step together, reflecting on progress, acknowledging the current animal welfare landscape, and envisioning a future where South Africa treats animals with respect, empathy, and understanding. Outdated legislation continues to govern intensifying systems. Enforcement remains under-resourced, and responsibility is too often diluted across departments, provinces, and mandates. This is not a failure of intention, it's a failure of systems keeping pace with reality. Let us begin with farm animals, among the most numerous and often the least visible. Every year, more than 1 billion animals are raised and slaughtered for food across South Africa. Chickens, pigs, cattle, sheep, animals whose lives are too often reduced to production inputs. The NSPCA's 2025 inspections found that 40% of farms visited were non-compliant with basic welfare standards. 40%. This means millions of animals are confined in conditions that restrict movement, deny enrichment, and normalize suffering. Intensive farming systems, characterized by high stocking densities, long-distance transport, and stressful management practices, create conditions ripe for disease outbreaks. This is a public health issue, an economic risk, and ultimately a governance issue. Moving forward means reimagining food systems that reduce suffering while improving resilience. The thinking behind 4 PAWS' Live Kinder movement. This encourages both individual choices and systemic change. South Africa's wildlife sector is central to our identity, or wildlife is central to our identity, and yet exploitation persists. Thousands of big cats are held in captivity in South Africa, bred not for conservation, but for commercial exploitation, trophy hunting, tourism interactions, and the bone trade. This is not conservation. This is commerce masquerading as conservation. Through the 4 PAWS Break the Vicious Cycle campaign, we've documented how captive-bred big cats are commercially bred, traded legally and illegally, and funneled into global markets. These animals cannot be released into the wild. They offer no ecological or genetic value to the wild populations. They are bred solely for profit, and public sentiment is clear. A 4 PAWS survey found that 94% of South Africans believe that big cats deserve better protection, and 68% believe that the exploitation damages our global reputation. Fragmented governance has allowed the system to persist, and time and again, this proves to be the enemy of protection. Then our companion animals, they face a crisis that can no longer be dismissed. Shelters are overwhelmed. Abandonment is rising. Cruelty cases continue to increase. Millions of dogs and cats live without care, caught in cycles of uncontrolled breeding, neglect, and limited veterinary services. This is no longer only a welfare issue. It's a public health issue, a community safety issue, and a One Health concern. Yet NGOs continue to shoulder responsibilities that should never have rested on them alone. In the absence of national sterilization programs, adequate funding, and humane stray management legislation. Across farm, wild, and companion animals, the pattern is unmistakable. Outdated legislation, inconsistent enforcement, and unclear accountability. Animal welfare is not a side issue. It sits at the heart of good governance, ethical leadership, and sustainable development. As a sector, we work incredibly hard. We advocate passionately, but not always collectively. Sitting in this room today is extraordinary expertise, evidence, and commitment. What we do next, together, matters. Government also has a critical role to play, modernizing and harmonizing animal welfare legislation that recognizes animal sentience, embedding species-specific standards across agriculture, wildlife, and public health, properly resourcing enforcement bodies and community-level interventions, recognizing animal welfare as a pillar of sustainable development, and also importantly, utilizing us and our community as key experts to rely on. At PAWS, our ambition is clear and unapologetically bold: to help build a worldwide animal welfare movement driven by scalable change, human behavior, and systems so that animals can live their best possible lives. The welfare of animals is a mirror of our humanity. If we fail them, we fail ourselves. So as we move into tonight's program, into the discussions, the data, and the perspectives that will be shared, I thank you for being here in person and online, and invite you to participate in this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Fiona, and again, to all of those watching online, thank you so much for joining us as well. Keep those questions coming. We will open up the floor a little bit later this evening and hopefully have as much networking time as possible. But just to prove this is a reciprocal love in this room, please eat the food, guys. We're going to give you 10 minutes to recharge, just have a little comfort break. The food looks gorgeous. I would imagine that every hoop that needs to be jumped through before serving this food has been, so it's probably the safest plate of food as an animal lover or conservationist or animal welfare expert you can lay your hands on. So revel in that, enjoy it, and in about 10 minutes we're going to open the floor and start our critical discussion, just to see how far we have come, but most importantly, it's go time. It's time to act now. How do we do that? Well, we will find out after you've enjoyed the canapes. Please go and enjoy a little something. We'll see you in about 10 minutes. Welcome back to Proceedings, ladies and gents. Seeing as I did actually ask you to go off and have a conversation and eat something and get a little bit merry, I will forgive any chatter. That's great. I want you to be connecting. You must be networking as much as possible. Thank you so much to our live stream audience as well. Those of you on YouTube, thank you so much. Please, can anyone check if Carol Baskin has joined the conversation? I think I spent about 30 minutes just talking about that, the last moderation I hosted. But to those of you at home, think of your questions. We are going to be opening up a Q&A session a little bit later. But right now, we are going to get to the heart of the State of Animal Welfare Address. At the heart of this narrative, certainly for me, the most powerful emotional conversation in South Africa right now, the captive lion industry. Just saying those words is absurd. When last we met you, I think that absurdity had completely overwhelmed me. Well, not anymore. We have the preeminent experts to join us on stage. So before I give you a little brief introduction, I'm going to ask them to come up on stage, mainly because one of them is a birthday boy and he just deserves a little extra applause. Ladies and gents, Mr. Tony Gerrans, not a lawyer, the lawyer. Joining him, Dr. Audrey Delsing, conservation biologist and animal welfare expert, preeminent. Dr. Louise Duval from the amazing Blood Lions. I think she's here to call BS on an entire scientific field, I have a feeling. And then a man who is so wonderful to spend time with, especially set against what he has to deal with every day. He makes me want to cry every time I am in his presence. Dr. Cam Chetty, or Mr. Cam Chetty, I almost gave you a doctorate. He might actually have a sneaky doctorate somewhere, knowing his path to get you. But between them, we're going to get a broader perspective. Obviously, Tony is going to plug us into the 2018 colloquium, what Parliament got to, the uptake, the recommendations being made. He's going to shuffle those white papers and speak to the broader, bigger picture before we delve into, with Dr. Delsing, the welfare concerns in this space. And I'm sorry, the trauma load will come with that, but we have to see it, and we have to believe it, and we have to take it on board, because that's very much what's driving how we can change things right now. Those laws are the closest to us right now, so let's reinforce them and drive that. And then, of course, we've got Cam Chetty, who has headed up the ministerial task force and has opted to continue driving that change now in his current role. But for all of them, please give them a massive round of applause. And I'm going to hand over to you, Tony. Take it away.
Thank you, Graham, and what a pleasure to be here tonight. As Graham and Fiona said, we're going to take a deeper dive into the captive lion breeding industry. This is an industry that first really started to appear on public's radar in the early 2000s, so we've been doing this work for a very long time. The welfare sector spoke to the government at that time and said, you need to build off-ramps, this industry is going to be problematic. Can we help you rehome the 2,500 lions at that point? And here we sit with nearly 8,000 lions 20 years later and a very complex problem. We have seen a long arc of policy, democratic engagement, scientific analysis. In 2018, we had a colloquium held just down the road here in Cape Town with stakeholders from industry, veterinary experts, policy, tourists, all manner of stakeholders, and that colloquium ended with some very clear resolutions that this industry is problematic on many grounds, not just animal welfare, but the damage it does to the reputation for this country as an ethical tourist destination. We've then seen a lot of policy action since then. We've seen parliamentary resolutions. We had the high-level panel, which looked specifically at this issue. We've had a white paper on sustainable use and a policy position. And we've had jurisprudence coming out of the Constitutional Court recognizing the intrinsic value of animals, and then the High Court speaking explicitly about this industry and talking about the need for welfare consideration. So it's definitely a complex space, and I hope that in the minutes that we have available to share with you, you can get a grasp of the complexity of that and where we sit in this industry. I'm going to start with Audrey and ask her to talk a little bit about the welfare problems with this. I mean, what is the problem really with the captive lion breeding industry, and why do people say that this is casting a shadow over ethical tourism, wildlife tourism in South Africa.
Thanks, Tony. Thank you to all of you for being here, and thank you for PAWS for hosting this event and for bringing this up into the public domain and raising the issues that deserve so much attention. So I think first and foremost what we need to understand and recognize is that the jurisprudence that Tony talks about recognizes that environmental authorities cannot disregard welfare by simply arguing away the responsibility. So welfare can't be ignored. It's not optional. And what we see is that often animal welfare is poo-pooed, and it's important to understand that this is not an abstract concept. It's a globally recognized scientific discipline, and one that is guided by internationally accepted standards and principles. And most commonly, these are reflected in what we refer to as the 5 domains, and that's encompassed in nutrition, environment, physical health, behavioral interactions, and the mental state, whether that be positive or negative. And then, as Fiona so eloquently described for us, the modern welfare science talks about a one welfare approach, and that recognizes that animal well-being, human well-being, and the environmental integrity are completely interlinked. And these principles are already embedded in international best practice, and as Tony has said, they are actually included in our South African frameworks. And so when we assess the captive lion breeding industry against these already well-developed welfare domains, we see that the welfare failures are systemic and they are structured. And they can't simply be resolved just by us reforming the policies, etc. And this is because the welfare failures in the captive breeding industry are not isolated incidences. The industry is inherent with these problems, and they occur at every single stage of the lion's life cycle. So if you think of the cubs, they're pulled from their mothers at sometimes hours of age, a couple of days of age, and this leaves the mothers and the cubs with extreme trauma and stress. And why is this done? Well, simply because it optimizes the breeding output. And this results in severe stress and trauma for both of those individuals. Once those cub interactions that are done through tourism, through the petting industry, etc., once that's no longer profitable, these subadults enter into what we refer to as a holding phase. And they are kept in confined environments, which deprive them of limited stimulation and any meaningful decisions of their daily lives. And there is absolutely no conservation purpose that is involved with this process. And this is a clear well-being failure. It's not just a husbandry anomaly. As adults, of course, these lions are retained either as breeding stock, they're sold on, or they are earmarked for trophy hunting, or basically they're slaughtered for their bones. And think about what that means. They don't have to look respectable, they don't have to look as a good trophy, they're just sold as a bag of bones. So, remembering that the white paper acknowledges that where animals are treated simply as economic assets, their welfare is completely deprioritized. And so when we speak about captive lion breeding and hunting, we know that this involves essentially the prioritization of basically tightly controlled kill scenarios of habituated animals or formerly habituated animals. And from a well-being perspective, there's no ways that this practice can fundamentally be compatible with humane treatment. In the 2019 lion bone judgment, it was quite phenomenal that it made clear that the lion bone trade cannot view the product, in other words, the bones, as in isolation from the conditions in which the lions are actually bred, trade, and killed. And so, in other words, the cumulative suffering of the lion's lifetime has to be legally relevant, and it must be considered. And this, again, refers to the fact that these lions basically suffer from cradle to grave, and the same welfare failures recur. And these are the processes that we know exist, and this is the extreme confinement. Basically, the captive lion breeding is an intensive captive system that prevents the animals from expressing their natural behaviors, such as roaming, exercising, going on marking displays, social choice and territoriality, and this results in chronic stress. With regards to their nutrition, we know that in these intensive systems, it normally results in a cost-driven feeding practice, and this results in inconsistent nutrition. This obviously then has a knock-on effect that leads to physical well-being or problems, and this results in limited veterinary interventions. And these factors all lead to one thing, and these are combined effects that lead to poor hygiene, stress in the animals, and that leads to the introduction of disease. And that disease is not just inherent within the lions themselves, but actually to the handlers and the carers and the people that interact with them through the disease transmission, or in other words, zoonosis. And this is highly, highly problematic, not just in the food that they are given and in the way in which it's prepared, but as I say, in the people that are interacting with those animals as well. It also leads to significant injuries as the cats fight amongst themselves, but also in terms of the interactions that people feel and go through when they're interacting with those animals. So a study was shown that out of the 52 predator attacks through these interactions that involved 58 big cats, basically the majority were attributed to lions. And interestingly, there were about 61% that were just injuries, but 31% actually resulted in fatalities. So this is probably a hidden fact that you're not aware of, but it's not just all roses and cute photos that goes alongside this industry. We know that unregulated breeding has also led to inbreeding and hybridization, and this is massively problematic because it is a direct threat to our biodiversity. And then just quickly to talk about the mental state. This is a real problem because when we talk about this, it's about the positive or negative state that an animal endures. And it's easy to see this, and this is by the stereotypic behaviors that are associated with the way in which these animals manifest their lives. And this is through chronic stress, trauma, and boredom. And this is through pacing and actually self-mutualization. So it can be easily seen that these animals live miserable, miserable lives, basically for economic gain and for profit.
Thanks, Audrey. Yeah, not a pretty picture at all. Those of us working in animal protection are often told we mustn't be emotional and we must be science-based. And we hear that a lot in this industry, right? It's hard to discount what you've just heard from Audrey. But I'm going to ask Louise to comment on that because her organization has done a huge amount of work on science. And indeed, this whole process around captive lion breeding has been a democratic process of uncovering the real science around what is happening on these farms. Louise, tell us a little bit about some of your work and how the science is showing that this industry is problematic as well.
Yeah, thanks, Tony, and thanks, Audrey. I couldn't agree more with what Audrey has been saying. And I think one of the things that we need to realize as well is that this industry is making a lot of unsubstantiated claims. They don't have the evidence base, they don't have the science behind it. So what we've been trying to do over the last 6 or so years is fill a lot of those knowledge gaps with peer-reviewed evidence to actually show that a lot of the statements that the industry makes just don't hold. And I think in many cases we've been able to do so. A lot of the research has been in collaboration with the World Animal Protection, and we're very grateful for their support as well. And I think we have been trying to close a lot of those knowledge gaps in lots of different areas. So what I want to do is really look at a few of those and see where we are. So first of all, I think we're talking about this industry, and let's just think for a minute about the scale of this industry. We're talking close to 8,000 lions in about 340 facilities. As Tony was saying, only maybe 15 years ago, it was only 2,500 lions. So we're looking at about 2.5 to 3 times more lions in captivity in South Africa than we have in the wilds. In addition to that, we've got thousands of other predators. both indigenous and non-indigenous predators in this industry. So let's not kid ourselves that it's just lions, it's not. And these facilities are predominantly in 3 of our provinces, the Northwest, the Free State, and Limpopo province. So if we're sort of looking at where this all sort of leads, with the ministerial task team, we did a national audit, and we know that registered lion bones, there's over 3,000 skeletons registered in this country, but that doesn't account for the Eastern Cape, Free State, and Limpopo, because they produced either no data or limited data. And based on compliance data from 2 provinces, the Northwest and Limpopo, with the ministerial task team, we try to look at how many people are actually employed in this industry. And we extrapolated that data, and we're sort of thinking 1,500 to 2,000 people that are employed in this industry. And I will come back to that in a minute as well, because this industry affects other sectors of our economy as well. The employment per facility is very limited, and very often people are not just employed, are not just doing lion-related work, also other wildlife or other agricultural related activities. I'm just sort of checking my notes that I'm not forgetting anything of importance. So I want to come back to the sort of the economic importance of this industry, but because that's one of the narratives that the industry often uses. And we did an economic opinion poll at the start of this year. And we interviewed respondents from 4 of South Africa's top key source markets in terms of tourism. So that was the UK, US, Germany, and the Netherlands. And one of the outcomes was that 70% of those respondents actually said they would be put off if visiting a country that actually allows to breed and keep lions in captivity for commercial purposes. And they would even choose an alternative destination to travel to. So if we start looking at that, we know that tourism accounts for about 9% of South Africa's GDP. We know that it supports 1.8 million direct and indirect jobs. And if we sort of look at the tourists from those destinations, we could stand to lose 860,000 tourists coming to this country if this industry is actually allowed to continue. And that could translate in 66,000 tourism jobs, compared to, at best, 2,000 jobs that are actually supported by the industry. So it's also from an economic perspective, I think there's a very good argument to be made that this industry is not really benefiting our country. I think in terms of welfare issues, I think Audrey summarized that amazingly, and one of the things that industry often says is that it's just a few rotten apples, but it's not. It's very widespread, and the NSPCA has shown that over and over again, that it's not just 1 or 2 people. And I think that we don't have a lot of scientific evidence in terms of the welfare issues in this particular industry. And that is very much because of a lack of access to facilities and the lack of transparency within the industry. We are working on a paper at the moment. We've done a welfare assessment of 34 facilities that are open to the public. So we can assume that those are the more sanitized versions compared to the more commercial facilities. And we looked at 10 different welfare indices. And based on those indices, we have seen that even those facilities that are open to the public score really averagely in terms of welfare. And interestingly, we found that those facilities that actually offer that interaction between wildlife and people, you know, the petting, the walking with lions, the sort of taking selfies. Those are the kind of facilities that actually score the lowest across their whole across the whole spectrum of welfare indices. They really scored the lowest of all. So there is a direct link and a direct correlation between the two of those. And I know I'm sort of running out of time, I think. But one of the things that I really would like to sort of look at as well is another narrative, and I think Audrey just mentioned it as well, is very often the industry says, oh, but, you know, our industry supports conservation. You know, that is so often the narrative that we hear. So we actually looked at that as well. We systematically analyzed 126 peer-reviewed papers and 37 grey literature sources. And we really found insufficient empirical evidence that the captive lion breeding industry contributes in any meaningful way to conservation and reducing the threat of wild lion populations in Africa. We actually found a lot of red flags that indicate that actually this industry could inadvertently facilitate the demands and therefore create loopholes, legal loopholes, and increase the pressure on wild lion population. And in particular in areas where the sort of regulatory oversight and enforcement are weak. And we are seeing that already in a lot of the lion range states, where lions are being found poached for their paws, with paws taken off and faces being defaced. And basically that is for the claws and the teeth. They're small products, easy to illegally smuggle out of a country and into Southeast Asia, but they're also quite high value. So we've already seeing that there is an impact that this industry has on wild lion populations. So it is the statements and the narrative that the industry very often has about conservation is actually exactly the opposite. So I think I'll leave it there because I know.
Thanks, Louise. So much to talk about.
I know, so much to unpack.
Both Louise and Cam were on the Minister's Lion Task Team, and Cam has stayed on and served on the extended Minister's Lion Task Team, so they really were in the workings of this industry. But with such a critical welfare concern about the animals still stuck in that industry, and this overwhelming public interest in ending it, Cam, I'm going to ask you, why is it sticky? What is happening in the political space where we've had ministers committed verbally to ending this? We've had parliamentary resolutions, we've had cabinet approval to end this industry, and we have a number of political parties who have taken the same position. Could you tell us a little bit about the work that's been happening in order to realize that and how that looks in practice?
Thanks, Tony, and thanks to PAWS for inviting me to the session. And to all of you this evening. I know we've got about 2,000 odd pages, and I've got literally 300 seconds to convert that to you. So in short, Tony, it's a highly complex, I think the work that we've done reflects that it's a very complex industry. There are numerous different interests. There's science and there's pseudoscience, and pseudoscience is often used to justify the existence of this industry. And if anything, I just want to focus on 4 points and give you some homework. So I think what you've heard from both Audrey and Louise gives you some background. And I think in the context of what they've said, it's hard to justify ethically why this industry should continue. And what we do know is that there are about 8,000 odd lions. In the studies that we've done, there's 40% non-compliance, and a lot of them repeated non-compliance. So it's not a few apples there. There's 4 out of every 10. That's there. What did government do? So government, I think, after a lot of pressure from all of you in this room and civil society, started off looking at developing a legal framework to address this. So we've seen in the legislative framework a white paper that is drafted, and the white paper is quite a progressive paper. It defines the concept of animal well-being as part of it, and then that's legislated in NEMBA. While we do say that, industry has challenged that and it's under threat. So everything that everyone has done in this room before to get to this position is now under threat. And we're beginning to see lots of legal arguments to remove clauses such as animal well-being, to remove the powers of the minister, etc. So, and I think that's important. What did the MTT do and how it was there? I think in response to a complex industry, government did two things in parallel. So the first thing they've come up with is something called a policy position after the high-level panel and the white paper. So the policy position essentially says unequivocally that this industry must end. However, the process of ending this can, I think, will cause an economic shock. And I think in anticipation of that, what the minister then said is, let's try and build some kind of consensus in the industry. And the consensus was started through a parallel process, which is voluntary exit. Now, the voluntary exit essentially, I think, was a task, and this is two parts. The first part of the MTT was to come out for options and pathways for voluntary exit. The second part of it was the implementation. Against all the odds, I think the MTT made significant, I think, positive changes. So in terms of the positive changes, there's been lots of interest and significant number of facilities that have agreed or indicated the interest to volunteer. I can't disclose the number, I can't disclose any of those things, partly because we sworn to secrecy. So when we look at this, the first point that I wanted to make around the complexity is the fact that you find the industry fragmented. 9 provinces, 9 different sets of legislation, etc. And what does that lead to? Poor oversight, number one. Secondly, making it very expensive. And in other words, we do say in the report, what the captive lion industry does is it crowds out funding for conservation. Because the money, in order to support the industry, to have proper oversight, even though it's minimal, right, takes money away from conservation. So the MTT, in response and trying to standardize the industry, did 3 major things. The first thing we said, let's introduce a directive that the minister can issue, and that will standardize 2 things. It's 2 directives. One is, what do we mean by animal well-being? And the second thing is, how does every official issue a permit? So those are 2 directives that the minister can issue, and that's done. The minister hasn't issued it yet. Second thing that we've done is we put together minimum standards in the interim while the industry is being closed down. What is the minimum standards of animal welfare and animal well-being that should be adhered to? And the approach that we've taken to do so was an inclusive process. We included industry norms and standards and others that they've given us because they were crying out for this. And in essence, we've come out with a set of minimum standard guidelines. And the third thing we said is, even though we do this, government doesn't have the capacity, right, to implement this. We've then developed a training program to implement all of that. So the way in which we wanted to do it, and I think it's quite important, is to get a just transition. So the concept of a just transition for us is an interdisciplinary notion that it cannot consider welfare on its own without the socio-economy of people. And here it's particularly the vulnerable people. And in doing so, we do think that we've come up with some interesting examples and pilots. And the first one that I want to talk about is in one of the transitions. We're transitioning from, or we hopefully want to transition from a lion farm into a solar farm. Creates more jobs, provides communities with electricity and others. And thirdly, it addresses, mitigates some of the climate change issues. The second one that I think is very interesting and on a fairly positive note is the province of Mpumalanga, through their leadership, has agreed to phase out this industry. So in other words, all lions are sterilized, will be sterilized in here. Number two, there will be no permits issued for any more new facilities or any more new lions. And thirdly, what hopefully we will do by the end of this month is to conduct a training program that includes government officials, that includes all of the volunteers in the province from different facilities, and some of the animal welfare organization representatives. So that's the flicker at the end of the tunnel of some kind of consensus building. Lastly, I think we understand that this is a seesaw, right? As animal welfare organizations, I think it's important to socialize broader civil society and others about the importance of animal welfare and well-being. And I'm going to ask all of you to think about how you do that. How do you bring in everybody, not only on the virtual platform, but in this room and outside the virtual platform? How do you build a critical mass that will be able to take this over the line? So thanks very much.
Thanks, Cam. Sorry, we're out of time, so I hope in the question and answer time that comes later, we could dive into some more of these issues. We'll all be here. So I'm going to hand back to Graham and say thank you to my panel for giving everyone a good overview of what's involved in this industry.
Thank you so much. Having walked alongside some of the members of the task force just for a sliver of what they've had to endure, and I will use the word endure because it was some of the toughest weeks of my life, stepping into some of the most traumatic weeks of my life. I never really came back from that, and I think there is before and after with the lion story. Once you get it, you pretty much shape your whole existence to see what you can do, because it doesn't just matter to the lions, it matters to all of us. I've got young kids who no longer understand the totem of the wild. That's where South Africa is right now, and this is the group that are changing that. So please think of your critical questions. I'm going to give your brains a rest for just 2 minutes, or at least give my brain a little bit of a rest for 10 minutes. You can recharge your glasses, have a little bit of a chat. We'll be opening with a bit of a Q&A session, probably in about 25 minutes, half an hour. So if you are weighing in online, please keep those questions coming. We've got 4 PAWS connected to that conversation right now. If you're an NGO working in these spaces, if you work in welfare, One Welfare, all welfare spaces, this is your opportunity to get that plug in. So please connect and share. In about 10 minutes or so, we will commence again with a different lens in terms of the treatment of domestic and companion animals and what is happening within farming. And again, many more questions arriving out of that. But I would leave with one thing, because I don't have to think too critically about these things, just feed into that emotion. Just imagine, if you will, we were talking about rhinos in this context. Just change the lion and put a rhino there. How would this even be happening? And everyone keeps coming to me saying, but what has conservation done? I don't think this has ever been a conservation issue at all. It's a farming issue. It's an every one of us kind of issue, which means the answer is not going to be found in the panel. Yep, they can answer our beautiful questions. This means ultimately the answer is going to be found in our shift, what we have to do. So I'll give you 2 minutes, just 10 minutes to think of how you can save the world, and then we will continue in just a moment. But please, the food continues to flow, the drinks are flowing. Please take a moment to just refresh and recharge. All right, welcome back to the final stage of proceedings this evening. Hopefully you have eaten your fill and made those vital connections. I was thinking about something. I have an emotional support dog at home, a Dachshund. In fact, I've got 3. And if I let them, and obviously they are seriously wired to hunt. If any of you have a purpose-driven dog and you don't let them go and stick their nose in the dirt, for a week, you will see a change in their personality that is fundamental. You can feel that trauma. Now, we have taken the animal that probably has the strongest DNA coding to hunt. It's the apex hunter, and we put it in a little cage, and its entire species is playing out in that reality. Sounds shocking until you go to another farm, and you see that we have been brought up on this balancing act. If anything, this conversation has highlighted how far we need to go for all animals in all welfare spaces. And this is, for me, probably the most important conversation because we can do something in this space. We can just shop differently. We can impact just by making a choice here. And hopefully you at home are thinking about those choices right now. And don't forget your questions, please. But I think a few more questions are going to arise from our next speaker. And she will go hard because that's what she has to do every day. So take that energy and let it drive you forward to talk about the state of farm animal welfare. She's an activist lawyer and co-founder of the incredible Animal Law Reform South Africa, Amy P. Wilson.
It's a real honor and privilege to be among all of you, fighting for animals, interested in animal protection. I'm going to be talking about the state of farmed animal protection in South Africa. It is a really, really big topic, and I'm going to do my best to do it at a very high level. I'm sure you'll have questions, and there'll be stuff that I don't cover, but you're welcome to grab me afterwards or talk to me after the event. So, I've got a lot of slides. This is just how I do things. I'm going to go through them quickly. Some of them are going to be hard to see. Some of them might be triggering. I'm pre-warning you now. You're welcome to look away. But this is the reality of what's happening right now. So, first I want to start off by grounding us in who farmed animals are. These are individual beings who are sentient with intrinsic value. Every single one of them matters. We tend to think of chickens, cows, pigs, sheep maybe. But the reality is that farmed animals are growing, and it includes in South Africa animals like ostriches, lions, as we've just heard, crocodiles, rhinos, various other game animals, and animals that are increasingly being farmed and exploited for different things, skins, food, pieces of their body, whatever it is that we choose to use them for, donkeys, rabbits. So the scale and scope, we can't talk about it unless we talk about human population growth, because the reason that we are exploiting more animals is because our human population is growing, including in our own country. And of course, we have a right to food in our fundamental constitution. Everybody deserves to eat and deserves food security. That's critical. Unfortunately, though, the response has been to increase animal exploitation and animal-sourced foods, whether it's meats, dairy, egg, etc. And this increased demand has led to the intensification and industrialization of farming in the country, where welfare, well-being, flourishing, all of those things are severely compromised. They don't coexist well. This is a short snippet to see how over time the number of animals that we are farming is exponentially increased. The number of farmed animals we are killing per day globally is in the millions. And when it comes to fishes and aquatic animals, we don't even know how many we're killing because we measure them by the tonnage, not by individuals. And the same is happening in our country as well, as you can see the graph representing over time increased meat consumption, which significantly spiked post-1994. But the consumption of meat is disproportionate to our population growth, and we are also consuming more meat in our country than many other countries on the continent, and we are some of the largest meat consumers, for example, of poultry in Africa, and even globally. And part of us, it's because we identify it as part of our culture and our identity, right? We celebrate our heritage by throwing an animal on the braai. And those are very important because we also have cultural rights and identity rights in our constitution. But unfortunately, These are individual animals, like I've said, and we're killing over 1 billion sentient chickens, just one single animal, over 1 billion every single year. And that doesn't account for the other ones that I've mentioned: cows, pigs, sheep, lambs, goats, you name it. So, how did we get here? Well, partly because of the lies that have been sold to us by the industry. This idea of small-scale farming, of course it exists, and of course it's important, but the reality is that there's corporate domination and control throughout our food system and the supply chain. Whether it's retailers or producers, there are many cases where just a couple or a handful dominate the vast majority of production, supply, and selling it to the members of the public. And the idea of this little red barn is, in fact, a big white lie. Happy animals, humanely treated, ethical, sustainability, you name it, greenwashing, humane washing. We are eating it all up as consumers, not thinking about the individual animals behind the sheds. And factory farming is the industrialization of animal production systems where we are separated from that system and they are separated from their mothers, throughout the chain. This is a veal system, which baby cows are separated from their mothers shortly after being born. This is a battery cage. 95% of chickens in South Africa who lay hens are kept in battery cages, so chances are you're buying caged eggs unless you buy free range. And in those systems, animals are mutilated, they are forcibly inseminated. Terrible things are happening to them. They can't spread their wings, they can't move around, they can't flourish and exhibit natural behaviors. The same goes for pigs, especially in sow stalls. As you can see a couple here, I'm not going to focus too much on this, but you get the picture. These are very harmful systems for sentient beings with intrinsic value who are treated as production units for our consumption. This is a slightly less graphic picture, but there are some excellent resources for you to go and look online and find out more. It's not only terrestrial animals, it's also aquatic animals in aquacultural facilities. This is from an NSPCA investigation. Aquaculture is the fastest growing food system in the world. It's also being pushed in South Africa. And if the animal suffering wasn't enough to get you, there's severe environmental harms from emissions of greenhouse gases, pollutions of soil, air, and water, impacts on biodiversity and wild animals, if that's something that you care about. The impacts are enormous. And we use precious resources like water. Animal source foods generally cost a lot more to make in terms of precious resources like water. And as I mentioned, they emit greenhouse gases, a lot more. So climate change, if that's something you care about, this is an issue you should care about too. We also feed a lot to animals. In order to feed them, we are sometimes feeding them food that we as humans could eat. So if you care about food security and feeding people, you should also care about farmed animals. There's also structural issues for farm workers who are exposed to cycles of violence, the people who have to actually slaughter the animals day in and day out. That then bleeds into their families, into their communities. There's studies that show that trauma. They're also exposed to zoonotic diseases, which so are we. So we give them more antibiotics to make them less sick, which also affects public health. So as you can see, there's various issues: environmental, animal, human health, social, etc. And what does the legal system do? Unfortunately, it's also fragmented and broken. We have a tremendous constitution that guarantees certain human rights, very important, and we have different pieces of legislation that govern farmed animals, whether it's animal-centric, like the Animals Protection Act, environmental-centric, which would talk to all the environmental issues I mentioned, or human-centric, things like the Meat Safety Act, making sure that people are consuming products that are safe. But unfortunately, none of these pieces of legislation currently are doing what they need to do. And because the government hasn't passed proper regulation to enforce positive minimum standards, there exist soft laws that are set by industry. So they are essentially the fox guarding the hen house. Just quickly, the Animals Protection Act, now which is the primary legislation, is over 6 decades old. It's completely unfit for purpose. It's a criminal statute, which means there's a high onus of proof. And even if we do get cases in front of the court, they are typically not for farmed animals, and there's very few, if any, a handful of prosecutions per year. So the law is failing animals generally, but specifically farmed animals who are even less considered. Sorry. I've lost my ticker. So, yeah. If you just look, for example, at battery-caged hens, if you look at the wording of the Animals Protection Act, in practice, it should actually prohibit something like this, but it doesn't. 95% of the industry uses battery cages. Other countries have banned them. Something like live export, again, also has been banned in other countries. Our government is essentially facilitating it through regulations. Sorry, having some clicker issues. The Minister of Agriculture has recently passed, or at least is trying to pass, regulations. And we see these coming out in practice in things like the daybreak farms, where hundreds of thousands of animals had to be culled. And yet the government is still promoting industries like this, new industries, rabbit farming, goat farming, game farming, you name it. This is the thing that they are putting their energy behind, while simultaneously declaring war on plant-based alternatives, strict regulations for plant-based foods. But there is hope, right? Despite all of this hardship that I mentioned, we do have a beautiful constitution, the birth certificate of our democracy. And while animals are not directly included in the Bill of Rights, we are seeing increasingly courts interpret human rights to apply to animals. So animals are sentient beings with intrinsic value, and the environmental right includes animal welfare. This is as per the Constitutional Court. And since then, other human rights, the right to information, freedom of expression, have been interpreted by the courts to include animal protection. And this leaves us with many possibilities to use the Constitution to show that intersection and interconnection with human rights and the protection of animal interests. So aside from the legal framework, we are seeing more research showing that consumers actually do care about animal protection and welfare and would consume and purchase higher welfare foods if they could and if they were affordable. And when it comes to issues in our food system, the South African Human Rights Commission is currently investigating across the nation the right to food, and people are putting forward these issues of farmed animals that I've been speaking about, which is extremely positive. And the Competition Commission is looking into issues of consolidation, corporate power in the poultry sector. So final slide, those are things that give me hope, and other things that give me hope is that people are becoming aware of this, whether because it's in main media or they're seeing undercover investigations. People are using the law, whether they're taking, for example, retailers to the Advertising Regulatory Board for making statements about humaneness. Corporates are committing to, for example, not keeping hens in cages in their supply chain. People are putting pressure on industry to make these commitments and do better. We're seeing a growth in alternatives that are becoming better quality, like plant-based foods that mimic animal products better. And there's more collaboration, not just within our sector, but across the environmental and social sectors. And that leaves space for us to use other areas of law, like I've mentioned. And then just the final point is that we have a new animal welfare bill in progress, and you can come and grab me afterwards to hear about some of the work we've been doing for the last 5 years on that. So thank you for your time, and yeah, look forward to the questions.
Well done. Listen, that being said, I don't know how much she charges by the hour or minute, so when you meet with her after this, I'm just going to absolve myself from that conversation. Thank you, new existential crisis loading. Now, absolutely everything we do, we now know, impacts the welfare of animals and the psychological welfare of every South African. And South African children have lost touch with wild spaces completely. And that's even kids living less than a kilometer away from the Pilanesberg National Park looking into it. They can only envision a lion or any other predator. Why are we so good at farming? I mean, who's farming the meat that we are eating? If the whole of Free State is farming lions and then Mpumalanga is farming cattle to feed the lions, where do the people fit into this conversation? Those are questions you're going to have to sit with in that uncomfortable space, chew on that gristle. The next introduction, super, super easy for me to make. If you are watching us at home, I want you to grab your cat, if they're not on your lap already. That gorgeous little puppy, bring them close, your companion. They are our emotional support structure when the rest of the world lets us down. Let's be honest. They are devoid of judgment, and for me, it's the most awesome responsibility we have being a pet owner, because you get unconditional love and commitment in return. Now, I've got to say these words exactly. Our next speaker, she was born ready. Not just for this, she proved that in the dry run, but for this role, she is not going to back down, and thankfully she is leading that charge. She is an animal law attorney and thankfully a policy advisor for PAWS South Africa. Please, to chat about the state of companion animal welfare that does affect all of us. Please put your hands together for Nicola van Wyk.
Thank you very much, Graham, for that eloquent and ego-bolstering introduction. I do indeed have the easiest job tonight. I get to speak about most people's favorite animals, our dogs and cats. It has been estimated that there are 4 million homeless cats and dogs in South Africa, and a census in Langa revealed that nearly 90% of pets in this township are unsterilized. While these stats are staggering, they are hardly surprising. Anybody that has visited South Africa's underprivileged areas would have firsthand witnessed the large volumes of stray and neglected animals roaming the streets. I must also say that the 4 million stray pet population estimation is just that. It is an estimation. In reality, there is no credible, verifiable data on stray or owned and pet populations in South Africa. And this is why PAWS submitted a request with Stats SA for the inclusion of the quantity of cat and dog household population questions in the general household survey. Our request was well received, and on short notice, they included these questions in the general population survey, general household survey. We continue to work with Stats SA to hopefully include a more comprehensive set of questions in future to provide household information on sterilization, veterinary care, the cost of pet care, and household sentiment on what it means to be a responsible pet owner. Stray animals are exposed to various threats, ranging from abuse to disease and starvation. Free-roaming animals contribute to noise nuisance and an increased risk of road traffic accidents. And free-roaming dogs also pose a serious risk to the public health through dog bites and the transmission of diseases such as rabies. Over 95% of human deaths caused by rabies are due to transmission of the virus through dog bites. Humane management of companion animal populations is vital in protecting communities against the safety and health risks associated with growing animal populations. Our South African courts, just like Amy has mentioned previously, have in recent years made some interesting animal-related rulings. And of particular interest, the High Court ruled that the government is legally obligated to consider animal welfare in its animal-related decision-making. All spheres of government thus have an obligation to consider animal welfare when exercising their respective animal-related functions. So in terms of South Africa's constitution, there are several animal-related functions and objects that apply to the different spheres of government. And despite these constitutional obligations, organs of state have largely failed to give effect to them, insofar as they apply to companion animal population management. Local government objects include the promotion of a safe and healthy environment for communities. Animal-related services, such as sterilization, vaccination, and community education, are vital in ensuring a safe and healthy environment for communities, especially in underprivileged areas. Mass cat sterilization programs that were educated in cities across Australia and the United States have shown massive decreases in impoundment, euthanasia, owner surrender, and nuisance complaints. So the savings to councils amounted to a 550% return on investment due to the decreased need for transport, impoundment, euthanasia, and complaint response. So the administrative machine required to respond to the overpopulation crisis can be minimized as a result of effective population management. Impoundment is reactive, euthanasia is reactive, sterilization is proactive. PAWS sent PI requests to the local municipalities of the Western Cape to gather information on municipal resources allocated to animal pounds, sterilization, burial of animals, veterinary care, animal management, and animal-related bylaws. I'm going to give you a brief overview of the fiscal results of these requests for the municipalities that do not qualify as metros. On average, the 5 local municipalities of the Cape Winelands district allocate less than 600,000 rand annually to companion animal management, with the lowest performers allocating no funding and the highest performers allocating 1.5 million rand annually. In comparison, non-profit animal welfare organizations operating within the Cape Winelands, that are of course funded by donations from the public, incur an average expenditure of 1.9 million rand. This means that on average, non-profit organizations in the district contribute 3.3 times more funding to animal welfare than local government. The 3 local municipalities of the Central Karoo district all reported 0 funding allocated to companion animal management: Beaufort West, Laingsburg, and Prince Albert. These municipalities cover a huge geographical area as seen at the top right of the map. This is an area left without any local government support for animals and their owners. On average, the 7 local municipalities of the Garden Route district allocate just under 750,000 rand annually, with the lowest performers allocating no funding, and the highest performer, which is George Municipality, allocating just over 3.2 million rand annually. And in comparison, a non-profit organization based in George spends up to 4 million rand annually. On average, the 4 local municipalities of the Overberg district allocate just under 50,000 rand to companion animal management, with allocations ranging from 0 to 135,000 rand annually. And in comparison, a non-profit organization based in the Overberg district spends up to 2 million rand. So we have an average local municipality spend of 50,000 compared to an animal welfare organization that might be spending 2 million rand. On average, the 5 local municipalities of the West Coast district allocate 700,000 rand annually, with the lowest performers allocating no funding, and the highest performer, which is Saldanha Bay, allocating just under 2.6 million rand annually. So taking the full picture into account, the average annual allocation per local municipality in the Western Cape amounts to a meager 85,000 rand. And to put this into perspective, at welfare rates, this is only enough to sterilize 130 animals across an entire municipality. The data that I've just set out indicates that with the exception of a few proactive municipalities, local governments are largely failing in their animal-related functions, particularly in implementing humane population management, education initiatives, and animal care, leaving underprivileged communities and the animals that live among them without support. For local municipalities to remedy this shortcoming, they need to enact bylaws to prohibit unregistered breeding and compel sterilization. They also need to implement data-driven, humane, mass sterilization, parasite control, and vaccination programs, as well as education initiatives. The benefits of data-driven mass sterilization outweigh those associated with the current practice of impoundment and mass euthanasia. Government has an obligation to implement humane population management of companion animals to safeguard not only animal welfare, but also the communities that these animals live amongst. There is a wealth of experience, skill, motivation, and donor funding within the nonprofit sector, but the sector cannot carry the burden alone. Collaboration with government is needed to effectively address these resources and direct them so that we may collectively ensure that South Africa's companion animal populations are successfully brought under control and sustainably managed. And I invite anybody that's interested in the topic to come and speak to me after after we've had our final send-off from Graham, and I'd love to continue the conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Nicola. Well, I can take 2 minutes for them to add a few more chairs for the panel to return. To your point, so I'm not an expert in many things, but being one of the older guys in the television industry and holding kind of a singular position when it comes to how big sponsorships play out in the CSI space, i.e. the whitewash that happens after we've taken our money and left a community or a species abandoned. When I go into a community, I operate on 2 principles. I'll know I'll either be in this lane or this lane. And I go into open emotional conversations, generally on behalf of the NGO that's been sponsored to do that whitewash, to save the day from a media perspective. And it happens a lot in our industry. I can see the ladies nodding their heads. I will use only one thing to establish where that emotional conversation starts with the people in that community: how they treat their animals. In a community where dogs are running around like rats and children aren't noticing them, I know now, as a 100% proven algorithm through tens of thousands of interviews, I am that old actually, I know I'm immature, but I've been around, I will not speak to them in any emotional context about any process being done, bar none. That's it. I know they have not dealt with their trauma. We can't have that conversation. The second I see a community looking after its animals, I can have that conversation with a child, with a 5-year-old. In fact, I've used a 5-year-old to translate the emotions of his grandparents in one of those environments. That is the joy here. We get this right, it transforms the community and the people around it. Now, someone understands that far better than me. And I could give a very long introduction from a political standpoint, but I think your confirmation bias might kick in and just ruin his moment. I'm going to introduce him as an animal lover, first and foremost, a very proud South African who stands up not just for his city, but for all South Africans very often. But he gave me a moment of inspiration. I think we were doing AfriPAWS Sterilization Day, their 71st sterilization in Vrygrond. And it was a community transformed. One gangline away, different reality, dogs treated as vermin. On this side of the street, shirts off, clothes protecting cats inside crates at 7 in the morning on a Saturday. You understood the value of that data. In fact, you phoned the mayor in front of me to prove to me the value of those people in that community. So I am very proud to say that there is someone here to represent his city very proudly and tell us what the city is doing. Ladies and gentlemen, Alderman J.P. Smith, and he is an animal lover.
Good evening, everyone. So I have a very short jaw. Firstly, welcome. Lots of familiar faces I see here. Several of the faces from the Animal Welfare Forum, a group of people I get to work with regularly. So I've got a comparatively short chore, but I must say firstly, thank you for the opportunity to sit here tonight. I think bringing us back to look at the state of animal welfare and where we're at in that regard is important. It's important to do a stock take and to hear subject matter experts speak on these issues and the debates and arguments around them and what we can do to create progress is extremely important. So thank you for the invitation. I really appreciate being able to be here tonight. And as such, some of you will have seen me take furious notes if you're sitting around me. It's just an occupational habit. In all meetings, I take lots of notes. And these are because you're offering stats and ideas that I can use and quote in my work and my engagement and with colleagues. And as such, I also immediately started texting colleagues of mine in the GNU and within the party and on the policy front and otherwise, and in provincial and local government around some of the work I'm reminded we need to do and some of the stuff that's not yet happened. So I am acutely aware of the challenges in animal welfare. My primary exposure is around companion animals. I consider myself somewhat blessed that I do not have to deal with the farming situation. The bit of exposure I've had to it was enough to drive me from eating meat in perpetuity, and I do my own modest little bit to advocate for a meat-free or animal product-free diet as best I can. And I think often people find that quite discordant because of the rest of the work I do. They have a certain Skopskiet and Boomklim perspective and are perplexed when they discover that the person at the other end of the equation is somewhat different from what they expect. So I understand that the situation is bleak. Also on the animal welfare front, I go on operations 2-3 times a week, and I encounter abused animals a lot. And my little side mission on many of these has become getting the animal welfare organizations, there's a WhatsApp group we share with many of the inspectorates, getting different animal welfare organizations to respond to some of the worst cruelty or mistreatment cases we stumble upon. But I do want to say to you, it's not all bleak. There is some progress that we can celebrate. Some progress driven by people like Tony and Nicola and many of the other members from the Cape Animal Welfare Forum and individual welfare organizations that engage us and push us to do better. And that strong partnership between the city and these animal welfare sectors has definitely made us try and step up to the plate. So I can tell you there is distinct progress. There's a strong surge forward on awareness and education. If I can stand next to a little boy in Langa and with a staff member from the SPCA, and we can do a quick English, Afrikaans, and isiXhosa explanation on a video that gets circulated on community WhatsApp groups and the neighborhood watch groups and otherwise about the rights of animals, not to confine improperly, to ensure that there's shelter, not to harm, to compel sterilization, to compel access to food and water. And we can do that, and I can find that video sent back to me by a resident in Hout Bay. I know that we've made some progress. So more and more of that communication driven by the sector and by the city jointly is happening. And I think we have now started to train our staff, these neighborhood safety officers we've deployed in different areas, to train them on the animal bylaw and make sure that as they do their daily work, they understand their duty in regards to it. Which brings me to the next thing, which is the city's new animal keeping bylaw, which is effectively written by the sector. Very few politicians and officials had their hands on that. It's largely written by Jaco Pieterse of the SPCA in consultation with the rest. He has now taken a break from his job as a chief inspector of the SPCA to complete his legal qualification, but he hasn't taken his hand off this particular aspect. And this afternoon I got feedback that that bylaw will serve before the May Council meeting. So that is on track, and it contains everything that this sector has asked for us to include that is within our legislative mandate. And we've taken a very broad view on that mandate, a very inclusive view of what we are allowed to include. We have seen an expansion on the mobile clinics. The sterilization activity we were talking about earlier is one of those mobile clinics. City provided some funding in response to a request by CORF for the funding of such clinics, and we're lucky that we have a mayor who is genuinely interested in the issue, so it is easy to twist Jordan's arm for more funding, and that mayoral fund has made steady disbursements. I think we've just given another 2.5 million in the last couple of weeks again, and that is definitely helping. And as such, I've been attending more and more of these sterilization sessions. We are not beginning to touch sites, I accept that. It's a very small beginning, but there is definitely a lot of forward momentum. There's definitely a lot of growth or expansion in the number of sterilization sessions we should do, or that we are doing. And I think Nicola is right that the horrors that come with failing to do effective population management has a deep, far-reaching impact on kids. Which brings me to humane education, which we are also now starting to grapple with. And we are part of that training of our staff is around humane education. We are training our Metro Police cadets at our college, which we've agreed to do now, and to start getting humane education even into the school curriculum, and to make sure we teach that at ECD level So we've been having talks to the sector about doing that so that we can make sure that children from a young age, from a stage when they are highly susceptible, when they are shaping their values around how they engage with other people and beings around them, already develop an intolerance for cruelty. Because if that cruelty and suffering becomes normalized, it becomes very easy to extend that to the other people you engage with. The issue of the rural municipalities, something I'm acutely aware of, because very often I am asked by members of CORF as its patron to engage colleagues in other municipalities. Sometimes you find them indifferent, sometimes you find them deeply passionate. We have a mayor of a neighboring municipality who as a child was rescued by a stray dog, who had a life-altering experience with an animal and is forever committed to the cause of animal welfare. You call him, it is very easy to get him to support it, support programs, but we accept that that is not the norm across the province. And so in September, Ivan Meyer and Alan Wendy are hosting a summit for the sector to try and expand some of the programs and the commitments we take for granted now in the city, also to those rural municipalities, and make that a sustained and ongoing conversation, not a once-off. So I'm hoping that is going to establish an important benchmark, and that we can increasingly then start holding these other municipalities to at least regularly engaging the sector, because just doing that alone will drive them in the right direction, just speaking to the sector regularly. The other thing Nicola touched on, the amazing success with Stats SA, for which we are deeply grateful, that inspired us to do our own survey. In the city, we got around 40,000 respondents, if I recall. And so that's useful data, and that was quite detailed, again, designed largely by the sector around the state of health and welfare, where people get their veterinary treatment, how they access that, how far they have to go, whether it's commercial or within the welfare sector. And so I'm hoping that that animal survey will help steer us in regards to the policy and bylaw formation and budgeting we do. So I think on many levels we have made substantial progress. The stuff that probably makes me the happiest is when I see us intervene, sometimes with great fanfare. That's usually when Yaku is involved, but very often quite discreetly with animal cruelty cases, where one of the inspectorates or one of the welfare organizations will alert us, our own animal control unit will go out or will support the SPCA, and we've had some really good cases involving dog fighting or animal cruelty cases where we've been able to intervene, and I am hoping that in due course I can seduce Yaku to come and work for the city permanently and infect the whole rest of our enforcement directorate with his passion for the work. But to all of you who are here tonight, thank you for your interest in the sector. City is always keen to partner with more of you. If you have good ideas that we can help deliver on, tell us. And when we are slow to do what we need to do, have patience with us. Government is a painful, slow organism. It is not as swift-footed as the welfare sector, but our hearts are very much in the right direction now. Thank you.
Alderman, thank you so much. Thanks for being quite a cool politician as well. It's nice introducing someone like you in that sense, but you really do put your money where your mouth is, and I think other parties are having to follow suit now as well. We're seeing it in other provinces, the connection to farming and the people that live in those areas. It's about that connection to the animal. It's not the commercial. So now I'm going to ask the critical thinkers, those who have been doing the heavy lifting today, to come up and please respond to your questions. Oh, just one last note. If JP comes to your car window with a flyer, just take the flyer, okay? Please. I've seen how hard you work, man. But thank you so much for being here. And you are always here, which is great. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm now going to ask our panel to come back up onto stage, so feel free to give them all the applause they deserve. Tony, Mr. Chetty, Louise, Audrey, Amy, and Nicola. I have a feeling you could probably ask them any question, even not related to this, and they could give you a cogent, very spot-on answer. But let's try and keep it to the space that we're in. I've got a few burning questions, so if you don't have, I will certainly jump in. My little brain is trying to understand this crazy balancing act that's being achieved. And I think, first off, you deserve the opportunity to open the floor. Is there anyone who would like to ask a question? There we go. Either Kajal or Karishma will bring you your mic. Although that beautiful bass and that voice says you might not need a microphone.
Yes, sir.
There we go.
Hi, everyone. I'm a second-year computer engineer student. But other than that, I'm here actually on behalf of my own company, Kopano Labs.
Nice.
Means Unity Labs. I'm the only human in it, and it's all run by AI. So
Wow.
I'm your guy. So while I say I'm your guy, AI is transitioning from generative AI to agentic AI. And PAWS' ecosystem is in a very bad ecosystem, meaning that you guys have a lot of legal issues. You guys have ecosystems which are the other provinces which are not communicating with each other. So all of that are pain struggles. And as an engineer, my only thing is to solve problems. I love that. That's what I love to do, to solve problems. So how do we solve PAWS' ecosystem? How we solve it is that we need to build an agentic AI that can consume all your aspects of what's happening, the legal action, what Cam mentioned, like each and every one of you. And how that can be done is through maths, which is a half-range Fourier series. You can go read up on it. So what a half-range Fourier series does is that I can consume all this information, all of it, at once. And what it will do is it will compact it, and it will bring it so enough that we can send it into the database, which will be MongoDB or SQL or whatever you think of a database to keep that information, right? And then from there, you guys can all have agentic AIs that have access to all that information. So he can access the legal information that she's trying to get across the 9 ecosystems within the PAWS ecosystem. It's all about just understanding the ecosystems. That's just me. I don't have a question.
All right.
I'm just here to advertise that I'm your guy.
I just want to ask how much? What's the pitch here? If you're going to step in, what sort of project? I love that.
Yes.
To that note, and you can give him a round of applause, because this is about shifting that gateway. Would
Yes.
any of you like to respond in terms of where we are in unifying this?
Yes.
Because I think one of the biggest issues we have is that there are barriers in between, that we are working from many different standpoints. I know, Cam, you dip your toes into the technical space quite a bit, but how did that wonderful statement kind of resonate with you?
Look, we did have a conversation. Because AI is emerging, and every single day you're getting newer and new
Yes.
opportunities.
It's moving very fast.
Yeah, with lines, what used to happen is they would put an IoT device, which is a scanner, in lines, and each of the line farmers would have to have some device on the lines. Usually what happens is they take this and put it in a drawer. So you can scan it and you'll find in the drawer. Or alternatively, like Louise will tell you, is when these lines begin to fight, these devices move around in the body. So with one of the task team members, Kelly Marnovic, and ourselves, we were looking at, very interestingly, using facial recognitions on lions to try and identify them. There is an international program on this, and it identifies whiskers and other facial features on lions. And that could be used as a more humane way of trying to identify lions than the IoT devices that they put in. I think we're just beginning this, and I know with the previous minister, we were looking at poaching, particularly in the fishing industry and so on, and we're using AI in that regard.
And I love this, to prevent us having to take the fake facts from a ChatGTP situation and pass that off as actual scientific studies. Being able to have a unified front in terms of that information and the data is critical, and I think technology it's offering so many opportunities for us to take that next step, but we still need the human engagement. Is there another question on our floor here? There's a couple at the back there.
It's very sad to hear that your children are becoming disenfranchised and disconnected from nature, and Louise mentioning that 70% of international tourists may consider not coming to South Africa because of issues like lion farming. I wanted to ask, I guess it's a question for Louise, is there anything that the public can do rather than just not come to South Africa or just give up on nature? What should we be doing as an individual member of the public to address this lion farming issue?
It's a question that we get asked a lot because people want to do something, right? When we feel very strongly and passionately about something, then we want to engage and want to be able to do something positive to bring a solution to the table. And I would like to say, it's very simple actually. Do not support any facility that offers any kind of wildlife-human interaction, that provides the opportunity of selfies with captive wildlife. Just do not support them, because once we take that part of their revenue stream out of this industry, it makes it less economically viable to sustain itself. And that is something we can all do. We just have to be, I think in many respects, people are a little bit selfish because they want to have that selfie opportunity. They want to be able to cuddle that lion cub because they are mega cute. You know, I get it, but I think we need to step away from that and say no. We take a stand. This is something which we as a society find unacceptable, and we can all do something about this. And it's about talking to your family, to your friends, to other relatives, neighbors, and just get that snowball going until basically everybody goes, no, we're not supporting those facilities anymore. Once they don't get the visitors through the door, they will either have to close their doors or they will have to change their business plan. So I think it's quite simple.
And often people just don't know better. So they don't know the difference between a walking with lions experience that is feeding the system and an actual ecotourism driven experience. I don't know how to tell the difference between institutions on face value. So do the due diligence.
Hi, thanks very much for this opportunity. I've been taking copious notes here. I've got a couple of questions ranging from the big cats right through to the farm animals and companion animals. My question that I've actually asked before of your four paw guys who try and sign people up for debit orders and so on, which they've managed to catch me on quite a few times, is education. I think we can all agree that education is the key to addressing cruelty. And my question is to Four Paws and so on is, can we try and get government or whoever it is that is in charge of airports and other transport hubs where we have large volumes of tourists coming through to educate them on not supporting these places that have lion petting animal interactions, walking with them, not just lions, the elephants, like the Nice Elephant Park has interactions with elephants there, and I won't go there because of that. So that's my one question, is how can we educate, especially international tourists who may be ignorant of the fact that going to go and play with a cute lion cub is actually not ethical? That's my first question with regards to the lions. Second question, if you'll indulge me, is, and I'm going to go off subject here a little bit, is why on earth is McLaren's Circus still allowed to use the Cape Town Municipal grounds to have their shows. And that is something I would like an answer on. It is manling.
The
Thank
elephant
you.
in the room, if you will. Can we deal with that? Because this surely, circus lions, as much as we never talk about them anymore, this is just one of those things. Who would like to respond to that?
I'm happy to start, and maybe Orts wants to go in as well. And I think it is quite embarrassing in a way, right? When so many governments across the world have actually banned the use of wild animals in circuses. We've got the technology to put up amazing shows using AI, using holograms. I'm not a technological person, but yeah, there are ways in which we can put performances up. We've got Cirque du Soleil type performances that are amazing shows. So why do we allow this? And I think it is something very difficult to answer, and I think we have to continue to put pressure on our government. We have to continue to put pressure on municipalities as well. Why do municipalities continue to give permits to businesses like McLaren Circus? And I think we have to possibly also help people like McLaren's to understand that maybe the old-fashioned way of doing business might not be the most clever way, and that there are other ways to change his business and bring it into the 21st century, where we're not using wild animals anymore for pure entertainment, because there's no education involved. And I don't know, Orts, whether you want to maybe add something.
I think Louise raises an important point, but I think the fundamental issue here is what Amy alluded to, and that is we have outdated animal protection laws, and we have fragmented systems, right, in the 9+1. So in other words, the national and the provincial laws, and then we have ordinances as well. So it's a very complex system. So until we have harmonized legislative policies that speak to animal cruelty and recognize it, and that can actually be enforced, this system is going to be prevailing. I think the other issue as well is that we continue to normalize these animals in these captive situations and the use in entertainment, and this can't be done. And so we've got to provide tools and use those tools that educate our visitors and our children into understanding why we don't go and visit animals in these situations. And there are tools that are out there that you can make to inform yourself about what a high welfare facility looks like, whether that's locally, so that's even when you are traveling as a tourist within our own country, and when you are receiving guests, and that's on all types of facilities. And so there's a website that you can go to, it's called Wild Choices, and they do a whole assessment of that. So there are very simple tools that rate these facilities, and that's the way to start. And you've got to push these messages out. That's the only way that we can do it. And agreeing that the permitting is a problem, but they're going to continue raising these permits until more of us show up and protest and raise the fundamental issues that need to be done.
Thank you. And it wasn't actually a tangent. I think it hits the nail on the head, because your reaction to seeing that circus is right. The laws don't match that anymore. The general consciousness doesn't match that anymore. And all of us are sitting here going, but why is it still happening? The same applies to every one of these spaces. It has to then become incumbent on us to figure out what it is that we are doing within the space that isn't matching or clicking. The law is being fought in its legal spaces. We can't hurry that process up, but we can make choices. But I thought that was a fantastic question. Any more questions from our floor here before we open it up to the...
She had one more question. Do you want to just...
Okay, yes, sorry, just to go back to the education issue. What kind of channels could we follow, or who do we need to put pressure on to try and advertise at our international arrivals areas and the airports about what actually goes on in these lion and other wildlife interaction facilities, and why not to support them, similar to a humane guide that Beauty Without Cruelty publishes about animal testing. How can we educate our 30% of tourists, I think it was, who do choose to come to South Africa despite the glaringly obvious holes in animal welfare?
So I think we have to take one step back before we ask that education question, because we do not yet have unanimous support from national government that this is in fact important. Right? So the Constitution in Section 24, the right to a safe and protected environment, has a sustainable use component in it, and that section has been largely captured by animal use industries as a way of socio-economic development, as a narrative around poverty alleviation. And so we get caught in this false binary between choosing between animal welfare and better futures for all South Africans. And I think what we've heard tonight from this audience is a progressive, enlightened view that says we are in fact not in a choice between animal welfare and humans. And the more we harm animals, the more we harm ourselves, right? Nicola spoke about it, Amy spoke about it, we heard it in the panel that I was involved in. We've got work to do to convince national government that this is not a problem. And when we have animal protection and the enforcement of protection resident in the Department of Agriculture that is responsible for the slaughter of 1.2 billion animals a year, we don't have fertile ground to talk about these ideas. We need to move this dialogue into a social justice space where we can start talking about protecting animals in the same way we talk about protecting other vulnerable groups in society. Once we have that narrative and that framing, then we can certainly talk about how do we educate people when they come to this country in order to make wise choices. So in the interim, Audrey is right. We can use tools like wild choices and those other things. We can work with the tourism authorities in South Africa who are very concerned about the damage we're doing to our international tourist reputation because we have lousy treatment of animals. But when we talk to the Department of Agriculture, for example, we can't even talk about the ethics of animal mistreatment. We have to talk about trade and how international trade is requiring that the minimum standards for animal treatment be increased in order to facilitate ongoing business relations, right? So we're not even yet at having an honest discussion that recognizes what the Constitutional Court told us 10 years ago to be true, that these animals have subjective experiences of their own life and their suffering matters morally and legally. So I think the short steps we need to do is there's a new animal welfare bill coming. It's been promised since the origins of our constitutional democracy. Every year the minister, whoever that person is, makes a promise it will be available to us in the next year. But the early signs around that bill is it's going to be written in a very utilitarian way because it's coming out of the Department of Agriculture, and we shouldn't accept that. We should require that this new bill is written within the social license that exists now, that the courts have confirmed the way we think about animals, not as property or not as commodities, but as sentient beings caught in this complex web of life that we have. So I think that's a very important step, and we need to make that a political thing. We've got local government elections coming up. We've got a GNU with a different dynamic. We need to make this question about animal mistreatment a political question. We can't be invisible in the political narrative, and we should not be bullied into saying we can't deal with this issue until we deal with poverty and other problems in South Africa, because these things are all interconnected.
I absolutely love that, because we have one of the best constitutions in the world. We are the true north for our people. So let's just shift the animals across that line, and I think we'll be that true north for the rest of the world. I love the direction you have taken. Have we got any more questions coming from our floor?
I'd like to direct this question to the Big Cat panel. So you spoke a little bit about the fragmented regulatory landscape in South Africa and how that's impacting the commercial industry. But I wonder if you could speak to the unintended consequences or the issues around, implementing norms and standards across the provinces, as well as the call that the industry has made to self-regulate. And perhaps you could just address those questions.
Yeah, self-regulation is a very interesting one. I think there is a real issue with the lack of regulation and the fragmented regulatory framework come sort of alluded to that as well. We've got a situation where we've got 9 provinces with 9 different sort of regulatory frameworks. They don't talk to each other. They sort of, one province would say, 400 square meters per lion is sufficient in terms of size, and another province says you need 5,000 square meters. Well, the welfare of an animal should be the same across provinces. There shouldn't be a difference. So we are far from having any true norms and standards. If we would have norms and standards, I think there's also the issue of actually enforcing those. Currently, a lot of the environmental monitoring inspectorates, they are not very welfare trained. They are responsible for the inspection and the compliance inspection, in particular, of lion farms. But if you're not welfare trained, how are you going to actually enforce norms and standards if you don't know what you're actually looking for? And I think that is part of the problem at the moment in our country as well. I know that the extended task team has been working on that and has been carrying out some training with the EMI inspectorate, which is obviously that should improve. And I know the industry has been, for many years, they've been really sort of talking about self-regulation. There are some of the industry authorities, like SAPA, that have their own norms and standards, and they say, no, we can self-regulate. But in the end of the day, self-regulation doesn't work. You cannot be judge and jury at the same time. Also, if it's a norms and standard that is part of an industry body that doesn't have any legal standing, and therefore enforcement is a very difficult one. When we look at the example of SAPA, for example, I think there's about maybe tops 10% of the lion owners are actually a member of that organization. So we are then only talking about maybe 10% of the total industry that standard would actually be sort of part of their business model because of that membership. So self-regulation is extremely problematic. And I think we should never, as a country, go in that direction.
There's also a massive criminal element involved here. So how can you self-regulate if you're allowing a criminal arm to your business? Cam, I noticed you wanted to weigh in.
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting question, particularly when you raise the issues around, the unintended consequences and the externalities in this. So we looked at it. Firstly, we found that despite industry saying we've got norms and standards, SAPA's membership is about 10%. We're finding 40% in our study of non-compliance. So it's not a small number. So essentially, self-regulation's not working, right, in this instance, and it's contrary to the profit motive. I think we looked at the second best option that Louise is talking about, and the second best option was we put what we call minimum standard guidelines to help the minister regulate this and make it uniform across the country. So it captures two things. The first thing it captures is broadly what do we mean, and give some content to the notion of animal welfare and well-being. And we use international standards like the Miller's 5 domains, etc., to be able to do that. And we've written extensively around it. We've brought in the industry. We've got their comments around it. And I think everyone agrees around that. Now that we have that as one set of directives, the minister simply has to implement it. The second issue and the second directive is to each of the officials in the provincial departments and the national departments, they call them issuing authorities. The second directive is how and when do you issue a permit? If it's contrary to animal well-being, etc., you shouldn't issue a permit in essence. So that's a second directive, and we think while it's a second best option, it will help in the context of lions to improve improve the scenario, and we can extend it to other species as well. I think the third one that we point out in our reports is what you're saying as the unintended consequences and the externalities. The more you regulate around this, the more expensive your compliance becomes. And in a fiscally squeezed environment, where does that money come from? So we asked the department, you charge profitable companies, permit fees of anywhere between 150 rands to 500 rands. Yet a single oversight visit is anywhere between 8,000 to about 12,000 rands. And if you have to do this properly 3 to 4 times for a single facility, you actually draining the fiscus of money. But where does that money come from? It comes from conservation environment, biodiversity conservation. So we're actually taking away money from conservation. We have contrary examples, When I speak to my colleagues at DTI and others, they will say to you, we don't, ask businesses, and we don't audit businesses and get them to pay. They need to do it themselves because they're a profitable industry. Unlike poor people or indigents that we subsidize, there's an unethical, there's no real ethics to take taxpayers' money and subsidize one highly profitable industry. DTI doesn't do it in any case. And secondly, one with ethics are questionable and damaging to the industry itself, as Louise points out, to the economy. So we see a number of studies. I mean, in addition to Louise studies, there's additional peer-reviewed studies that shows while this industry generates maybe about a couple of, $100 to $200 million in revenue, what we lose, the opportunity costs, is in the region of billions. So why we are in an industry that's producing 1/10 of the benefits or even less, right, with damaging consequences to tourism. So the whole thing doesn't make any sense at all. And clearly, I think, those are the kind of negative or unintended consequences of over-regulating this. And we simply, the externalities in this particular industry. Thanks.
I absolutely love that. I know we've given you a lot more to think about and even more questions than statements. This has been a living workshop, and that is a beautiful thing because that's where this discussion needs to be. It's time for the bleeding hearts and the TV people like myself to get off our soapboxes and stop screaming this. And I'm sorry if I've screamed at you the whole day, but I think you understand it kind of warrants that level of emotional investment. The answers are going to be found in the intersections around us right now and what we can do to weigh in and have impact. We could sue someone right now if we wanted to. I think we've probably got enough in our canon to be able to do that. But that's the kind of action that needs to be taken now from an individual perspective. Get incensed, get impassioned, and do something about it. So I want you, with the most passion that you can muster, please give a massive round of applause to our panelists. Unfortunately, we didn't get to sue anyone today. Thank you so much. I'm now beginning to truly understand, set against the challenge and how often the answer isn't the answer, the soft touch of walking within this industry, of building relationships with key role players, PAWS being there to be the answer to this regulation and pick up the pieces, that's enabling the change. One-on-one, one farmer at a time, one politician at a time, one purpose-driven business owner at a time. That is how this is going to be unlocked and unglued. But please, as they stand up to bid you a fond farewell. Okay, go for it. That was just...
You go.
Someone who's more enthusiastic than me, I will allow it. I will allow it.
One very quick one. There's a huge gap. We spoke about domestic animals. We spoke about farm animals. What about our urban wildlife? Yes. And we're sitting in the Western Cape with this mountain chain going through us. Majority of the population is some sort of urban wildlife, be it birds or the caracals, the baboons. Where is this?
Yeah, the baboons.
Let's all rush to answer that one.
Can we go back to like the barge with the cows, please? Yeah.
Why did you allow that question?
I think the question, it asked for itself there.
Yeah.
Very, very difficult space to navigate, as we've seen in Cape Town. Who would like to jump at that?
I'll have a go.
Go for it. Yeah.
Okay, JP, go.
Go for it. Can we have a mic there? Thanks. Thanks, Kajal.
So firstly, just back to the McLarens. The animal welfare sector wrote the previous version of the bylaw, and in that included a very unfortunate loophole and deficiency in the bylaw, which McLaren's has exploited. And when we attempted to stop them, they took us to court. So we have now fixed that. I advised you earlier from the stage that the bylaw will go to the May council meeting, and it will close that particular deficiency in the bylaw.
Correct.
So that is this time that they're there is the last time they will be able to operate with an events permit.
And
it did take about 2 years for the bylaw to be amended, but that is what bylaws take, 2 to 5 years. So that's as quick as you're going to get it through. As for the baboons, contentious topic, City has explored many options. There is now a working group. I think that I would do a disservice to answer the thing comprehensively. You need to get the department that is driving it and the maker member responsible, Eddie Andrews, as the deputy mayor, whose department's been working with the sector. But I think we're at a much better space than we were at in the preceding years. The city has accepted a much more significant role. There are probably officials here who, in their official capacity, aside from their relationships with people on the stage, could comment on that or might want to do so, or not. No, okay. So I think that we're in a better stage. The city has definitely adopted a degree of responsibility. Tony can maybe give more meat to that answer.
I think he's quite happy that you answered that one, actually.
So I'm not going to answer it head on. What I'm going to talk about a little bit is human-wildlife conflict, because that's a fairly extreme example of human-wildlife conflict and is very politicized here in the Cape. Sorry, looking the wrong way. Yeah.
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 Absolutely. So we have a growing drumbeat across the country to cull elephant for the same reason. And even smaller animals that we would normally regard as vermin or pest are being exterminated because they share an urban space with us. I don't think our current framing of animals and the current legal framework gives us the necessary tools to deal with the type of coexistence frameworks that we need in order to live in a harmonious way around a national park, for example, right? I think there are people working on these different types of frameworks. It's slow, it's legal development and policy development, and I don't know, I think we're going to lose species before these things become mature. So we need more urgency, and we certainly need new ways of thinking. But there is literature about this. Overseas, there is a lot of thought about how do we think about animals in different ways, not the simple binary that we have between domesticated and wild, but what about this category of animals that live in the spaces between, and they call these liminal animals, and there are legal frameworks emerging to suggest that maybe we can tolerate certain inconveniences to us as humans in order to protect biodiversity who exist in and amongst us, whether those are birds or baboons or elephants, if you live in KZN and other places. So I think what we're going to have to do to solve these problems is step back from the transactional difficulties and choose a framework that says we recognize that compromise is required on both sides. And we don't always get that. And the more politicized the matter is, the less likely we are to find a solution for animals. So I think the solution for this is we need to open new spaces for dialogue about creative solutions here. We are sitting in the 6th mass extinction. In our lifetimes, we're likely to see probably the end of most wild animals, terrestrial wild animals in the wild. It's a terrifying situation we're sitting in. So these are real urgencies. But I think we have to take this animal question away from being an us and them issue, and we need to start to frame it in a different way. So the One Health is a start. It does recognize the interdependencies, but I don't think it goes far enough. And so if we can together find ways to have these debates in a constructive fashion and not make it a win-lose each time, I think that's the only way we're going to solve these type of problems.
And from my bird's eye view, the change is only happening when we have these very rare meetings of minds, and the expectation is that government or municipality or someone is going to do that on our behalf. I don't think it hasn't even reached that zone yet. If it doesn't start with us bringing key stakeholders together in our small way, I don't think it can shift. I'm going to have to shift to some of our online questions because we really have had a broad audience weigh in tonight, but I don't want to start a riot. You didn't get to ask your question.
Can you guys hear me?
There we go.
So I'm Jono. I'm the founder of the Karoo Donkey Sanctuary. And Cam, this question is more for you. How's it? Question is more for you. You talked about science and pseudoscience. I mean, we can talk about our laws and bylaws and moving, the state of things for animal welfare in this country. In terms of pseudoscience and what is going on in the Far East, how do we start, we're talking education, how do we start dispelling the myths that have been carried from the emperor's days, donkey skins, for example? You've got supply and demand. What is the supply? It's a $7 billion industry. So that's the demand, So the supply is obviously, it's going to be there. If it's not legalized, it's going to be through bush slaughter. So how do we start dispelling the myths of pseudoscience, which will affect rhino horn, lions, donkey gelatine?
Just move the gateway.
For me, we need to start that side. Because we can do as much as we want to do domestically, but unless we can, move some major change up there, we're stuck, in my opinion.
Thanks. I think there's two ways. The one was a practical one that we looked for at Lions, but I think underlying all of this is the issue of ongoing education, not only in this country, not only supply side, but also on the demand side. But essentially what we're beginning to hear is, no, we cannot deal with the issues of lion bones because it's centuries of, use in the Far East or, in East Asian countries. But the reality is it was never lion bones. It was tiger bones. And here we're seeing a classical economic example of where supply influenced the demand. And literally this industry started up in the 1990s, Louise, if I'm correct. And
money, always.
Yeah, so the supply of lion bones was a recent phenomenon, not thousands of years ago. Even that was a manufactured demand. So the interaction of where we educate has to be at both ends, the supply side and the demand side in this instance.
We could start with the major travel booking companies that bring purpose-driven travel to South Africa, and they can maybe put back in what they have taken out to the tune of 2.8 billion rand a year, I think. So America is going to be a major, major ecosystem that we're going to have to crack to get this right, or we're going to have one really big gate in between us and them. There are a lot of questions brewing here. I would love to get into some of our online questions just so we don't disenfranchise those that have stuck with us through the hard yards. But we are not going to have enough time to delve critically into any more subject matter tonight. I can see we are starting to branch off in a few different directions, which is beautiful. That means we're getting granular. We are applying it to our own spaces. So once again, I'm going to ask you to wish Tony a happy birthday and give them all a very big round of applause. Some difficult questions to answer. You guys can take your seats once again. Very difficult path to walk, and you can imagine those that are having to fight these battles on a higher level, especially how it must feel like you're screaming into the wind. But when we look at the reaction, the knee-jerk, the spring that happens when these small little meetings of minds happen, then it really does reinforce just how important these moments in time are. If anything, it's the smaller steps that are winning the battle right now. So for one final small step to see us on our way tonight, I'm going to invite Fiona just to cap the cherry on the top for this evening's proceedings.
Thank you, Graham. Oh, no. There we go. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much. As we come to a close of this evening, I just want to pause for a second and reflect on what we've heard. There's a huge amount of subject matter, content, complexity, and across the discussions, the evidence, and the lived experiences that were shared tonight, one message has come through really with unmistakable clarity, and that animal welfare in South Africa is definitely not a side issue. It needs to be supported by civil society, government, and community efforts collectively with strong legislative frameworks to protect it. Animal welfare needs to be protected because it means that we are protected. We've heard about big cats trapped in systems of exploitation, enabled by regulatory gaps. We've heard about farm animals raised at scale without adequate legal protections. And we've heard about companion animals, where NGOs are carrying burdens that were never meant to be carried alone. These are not isolated problems. They are symptoms of the same underlying issues. Fragmentation dilutes impact, and we've heard the word fragmentation a lot this evening. Alignment creates change. What we are short of is not care or compassion or empathy. It's coordination at a scale to create lasting impact. So I leave you with this invitation. Please, this evening, continue the conversations, engage with each other, build the connections, and join the Live Kinder movement. When we move together, purposefully and strategically, animal welfare becomes impossible to ignore. Thank you.
So I'm going to say my fond farewell, but I know that I will be connecting with many of you as my kind of role in this journey starts to expand through all the opportunities that are opening up. I think the bottom line here is we keep reaching out for someone to do something about it, and then we realize, but it has to be us, but it's going to be difficult, then we disengage. That's pretty much how it works, whether we're making choices when we're shopping, whether we're choosing where to take our families, whether we actually want to act on what we have heard today. But if ever there was a time to act, this is probably the most powerful brand South Africa story to emerge post-apartheid. This is the totem of the wild. We are the custodians of the big five, and we are slaughtering them wholesale and selling it to the biggest criminal network in the world. And it's fine. It can't be fine anymore. And I don't know how else to frame this, because this is exactly what it is. We can hide behind the nuances of regulations and what's happening and corruption, and it's great. And then we fill that action vacuum with blame, and nothing happens. Otherwise, why are we sitting here 10 years down the line? 8,000, have you ever seen even 400 cows together? Wait till you've seen 400 lions together in that situation. Your brain unsees it. And I know this is the kind of welfare abuse that people are seeing in all spaces. Maybe we've got to practice denial to survive this. Whatever that thing is, swallow the bitter pill, suck it up and do something, or stop complaining. That's the bottom line. You've got to start with a soft touch with your networks, with the people around you. If you've got a company, pump money into the NGOs that are keeping service delivery propped up in South Africa. The bottom line is, it is now up to us. The legislators, the fighters, the warriors have done as much as they can set against an impossible situation. It should have been impossible to achieve what they have done, set against what they have explained the challenges are at the highest level of government. But we are sitting here with new legislation, with democratic might behind it, with this beautiful inversion of value, where those key role players like PAWS that had to pick up the pieces now hold all the pieces. So what I'm going to say to you is the last piece of advice, and this quote has been butchered so many times, but it is the most applicable now. If you're looking forward and trying to understand this complexity and what to do and where to go, the bottom line is, if you want to predict the future now, you create it. Because if we don't, they are. And at the moment, to the tune of billions that are not staying in our country, not feeding South Africans, destroying the psyche and the soul of our children. And we've heard the science behind that now. So fill that action vacuum with action. Go out and do something. If nothing else, just network right now. Give your number to 5 other people here, and let's reciprocate. But I'm going to say thank you so, so much for listening to me scream all night, and to the amazing panelists who have been doing this for 20 years, holding this line. Please can we give them the most heartfelt applause for tonight. And thank you, thank you, thank you for being here. Please have some fun. There are still some eats left, something to drink, network, have some fun now. Maybe go to those uncomfortable spaces, but most importantly, please look after yourselves and get home safe tonight. We kind of now need you in this battle, in this charge. But thank you. You have all been wonderful. Thank you, thank you, thank you.